Welcome and greetings to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I am Dr. Ray Mitch, your host, and the Psych Monologues is a podcast exploring the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. Welcome to the early days of June. I have been off mic for 4 weeks as a fair indication of the level of chaos that has been present in my life, not only from the perspective of trying to recover from a long semester and trying to deal with the overwhelming demands and issues that come along with the pandemic and teaching, but also just a lot of goodbyes, very sweet goodbyes, but hard ones to make all the same. And then I took some time off. And I took some time off to get some writing done, which I have been working on for quite some time. And then finally came back to a massive remodel of our house that I have affectionately referred to it as the project from hell. And so you may hear an echo that I can't really control very well because my office here at home is so empty. There is really nothing to dampen the sound of it. So my apologies. It sounds a little bit like I'm in a cave, which would be throwback. So what I want to do to introduce this is over the next 3 or 4 weeks, what I'd like to do is allow you to get a bird's eye view of where we've come from in the Psych Monologues. We started out literally, the Psych Monologues started out as a response to my students and their attempts to deal with all the losses that they had to contend with during a pandemic, the early days of a pandemic. And so you will have references in there for what the days have been like and the issues that have been pressing in on my heart to be able to take some time to talk. And so the next 3 or 4 editions or episodes here are going to be from those days. I'm going to pick 2 or 3 or 4 of my favorites. I don't really have a best of because I don't have that many people that interested in what I have to say. So it isn't like there's overwhelming success for these. They just are near and dear to my heart and something that I want to share with you. So what we will have there will be plenty of references to Love You Later by the podcast because that's really where we started. And then I will launch into whatever the topic of the day is. I think we're going to talk a little bit about grief and then talk about being a soul friend. And then another one in 3 weeks is going to be, I believe, about the journey matters. So it's kind of a smorgasbord of episodes from the past. So it's a little bit of a walk down memory lane. And then at the back end, I'll do my usual end of program reminders about the silent retreats and everything else. I do have an interesting wrinkle that I'd like to share with you that's coming down the pike as far as the Apple podcasts are concerned, that it make it possible for us to do some continued funding. So here's the podcast. It's a walk down memory lane. Enjoy. You know, I have become completely convinced that we are living out the movie Groundhog Day. Every day begins the same as the one before, and we are stuck in this loop over and over and over again. And just the other day, I was just thinking about this, and a song came to my mind of when my kids were young. And it was Sherry Lewis, and it was from a little kids show called Lamb Chop. And they had a song that seems to capture what we are seemingly going through. And I thought I would share just a 20 seconds or so of it, just to give you a sense of what it feels like day in and day out.
No, this is the last time, right? This is it. This is it. This is not fun. Okay, if you guys can keep that analogy far, far away. Go, go, go. No, keep on going.
Yeah, I think you get the picture of what we're talking about here, and it seems to me that pretty much captures what these days are like. It's like a song that never ends, and it keeps going and going. And Sherry Lewis in that kids show just loses her sorts altogether by the time the song is entirely over. The characters do a marvelous job at making her downright crazy, and they end up ending their show on that song, which is always the kind of the song that tells you that the thing has come to an end. The worst part about that is if I played it much longer, it would be emblazoned in your memory, and you would be humming or whistling it through the rest of the day, and I didn't really want to inflict that on you. So, welcome to the Love Ya Later Bye podcast. I'm Dr. Mitch, your host. This is something of a Psych Monologues over the last 10 to 15 days of the semester for many of my seniors at CCU that are finishing up in the psychology program, and I thought I would put together this podcast just to reflect on life as we know it and the circumstances we find ourselves in. There's a lot about this that gives us pause to think about what our lives are like and so forth. And one of the things I wanted to spend some time talking a little bit about, well, before I do that, let me mention one other thing. I want to give a shout out to My Quiet Cave. It's a ministry here in Denver that is devoted to faith and mental health, making a space in the church for that kind of thing. And I was graciously asked by the executive director, Kimberly Peterson, to join her for a Facebook Live event yesterday morning. Good grief, it feels like it was 2 days ago, to talk a little bit about grief in the midst of social isolation. And I keep hearing over and over again in the news reports about we will have another hump, if you will, unlike the one that comes with coronavirus, where the cases seem to hit their peak and then kind of trail off. But we will have something very similar to that with the mental health cases and issues that will arise and are already arising around all the social isolation that comes along with it. But so I would point you in that direction to take a look at myquietcave.org. They are a great program and organization, and they are trying to meet the needs of people in the church and talking about mental health issues that oftentimes are very hidden in the background for churches. So thank you again for the invitation, Kimberly, and I look forward to an opportunity to do that again if it ever arises. Okay, on to our topic of what I wanted to talk about tonight. I have had ongoing discussions with students about a variety of things, and I think students oftentimes end up being the leading edge of issues that the adults are thinking about as well. Maybe they are more open and willing to pull these issues out into the open and talk about it. I'm not going to sit here and talk or be a cultural observer or commentator about what's going on in that regard. But one of the things that I wanted to take some time talking about was really the issue of how grief tends to reveal things about us. Because of our discomfort in dealing with grief and losses that it actually is pointing back to, it seems to reveal things about ourselves that can get pretty uncomfortable fairly quickly. One of the things that it points out is really our image or understanding or idea or concept of who God is. I made mention of this fact a couple of days ago, is that we end up asking questions and referring to the God that is of our own making rather than the God that is described in the pages of Scripture. And the reality is we really can't look at Scripture and the things that are written there without bringing our own bias to it, our own filter to it. And because of that, it becomes very difficult to try to make sense of the God that we say we serve and how he enters into the world of loss. And Lamentations, which is an entire book of the Bible devoted to loss, as well as the book of Job, as well as a number of different Psalms. A lot of different things are really devoted to that. But grief has a way of revealing things, not only about us, but our relationships with other people, our relationships with God. And I think it's worth paying attention to when we're talking about this subject, because we're all kind of confined indoors, and our relationship starts showing cracks and seams that we kind of knew were there, and then we just kind of find ways of ignoring it. But it reveals something about us in terms of our relationship with God, and then, of course, our relationship with others, and our expectations that we have about how they're going to meet our needs and how they're going to respond to us, and what kinds of things we read into the things that they say that we may not necessarily on a regular basis do, because our contact with them ends up being modulated and diluted because of going off to work and other things like that. But it also reveals, I would suggest, that it reveals about just our take on anything uncomfortable or negative in our lives. I think I've mentioned this before, but our tendency in the world in which we live, and I don't know that our elders are in that position now. I'm getting to the age where elders mean something very, very different than it used to. But because they faced adversity and suffering and pain in very different ways than we did, we tend to have our own take on that thing, and usually it is something must be terribly wrong because I'm experiencing the things that I'm thinking about and feeling, and the suffering that I feel like I'm going through. And just as Blaise Pascal once said, that God made us in his own image, and we return the favor, and we end up creating a God in our image, and then duking it out with him with condemning questions and other things that really are directed toward a demand for an answer when there really isn't an answer. Unfortunately, the answer ends up being directed toward or anchored in the nature of us being human. And so the thing I would point us to and suggest maybe spending a little bit of time talking about is maybe it is that lamentations or lament or grief is not something to see as a problem as much as an indication of our humanity. Now, the minute I say that, that does not mean that I am condemning us by doing those sorts of things, because I don't know a single self-respecting kid that when they are disciplined or they're given a decision by a parent or an adult, that their first response is, why? Why? The problem is of course, is that if the parent gives an answer, it still isn't good enough, because it isn't really a why question. It's more a matter of, I don't agree with the answer, and I don't care what the answer is, but give me a reason just to argue with, because I'm mad and I'm upset and I'm sad and I don't like having my wings clipped or whatever that might be. And that's the backdrop, I think, to the things that we're talking about. From a perspective of just perspective, I think we have to take into account that what we do with the low points of our lives, grief included, questions included, oftentimes have a lot to do with what we do with our sense of meaning. Because when we scrub out the things that make it difficult in life, including this, I mean, most everybody, or a lot of people at least, are under house arrest in a sense. And our freedom is under, I wouldn't say under assault, but it certainly is severely limited. I had one person once say to me within the last week or two that they're not only grieving the loss of their interpersonal relationships, but they're also grieving the loss of their freedom. The freedom to access their friends and get to their friends. Now, can they do that through Zoom or FaceTime or Skype yeah. But I'm not going to find presence in a screen. And there's something to be said for the presence of another in real time, in the same room, looking at one another and interacting with the other person. And I think we've missed, well, I shouldn't say we've missed, but I think we underestimate and take for granted all of the other cues and richness that exists in our relationships with each other that doesn't come by way of words. I think in a lot of cases we overestimate the importance of words. Now, I'm not saying they're not important at all, because if that were the case, then I wouldn't be doing this podcast. But there's so much more when I sit and talk to somebody than just the words they use. From the posture they sit in, to the inflection of their voice, to the glances of their eyes, to the intonation, all of those things are things we take into account, and they end up getting emptied in a Zoom call. I can't watch very well the person's eyes. I mean, there's a lag for one, and the intonation of their voice is lost. And again, I would go back to there can't be presence in a screen. All of the heat that comes from our interaction with each other is taken out of it. And that's something worth, I would say, lamenting. And when I lean into that and grasp it and understand the loss that I have in that regard, I begin to grow in my appreciation of these interpersonal interactions that I have with people, right down to not necessarily touching them, but just being in their presence and them being in mine. And it's easy to miss it. I get it. I'm on top. I'm right in the middle of all that. But yet I get assaulted by it every day, because I'm talking to people 4 to 6 to 7 hours a day through a screen, for crying out loud. And it stretches my ability to actually find a way to connect with the person. And that's an important aspect of, I think, what we have lost. And it doesn't register on our radar at all, I don't think. Some people will. I'm not saying that nobody gets it, but I think for a lot of us, we are so busy adapting that we are not paying attention to the things that we've lost as a result of this. And I'm not trying to overemphasize the things we have lost, but I think my ability to empathize, my ability to connect with people is built on the commonality of our experiences around this thing called loss and change, and things that I resist and I get frustrated about and I get angry about, and all of those sorts of things. So we're caught in a vortex. All of us are. And if we spend any time looking at it, reflecting on it, I'm not making a pitch for us to just be depressed all the time. I'm not at all. I think everybody has to adapt to this situation. At the same time, it can be counterbalanced by a reminder of my connection after we walk out of this, whatever that's going to look like. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but whatever that looks like, that's the thing we have to keep in our rangefinder and connect with people when we have the opportunity on the backside of this to bask in the richness of our connection with one another. That's it for tonight. And now for some end of program reminders. The wrinkle that I mentioned at the beginning of the program really had to do with something that Apple is rolling out with Apple Podcasts, and they have made the possibility present for podcasts to have a subscription. And it occurred to me that perhaps that might be one way that if I am through the Psych Monologues, I'm bringing any measure of value and help and assistance and support to you and your daily life, I would humbly request you to consider, and I'm giving you a heads up because it's coming. It's not present just yet. I haven't figured out all the details, but if you would be willing to consider a small contribution, you can contribute and get a tax deduction through the ministry partner, and that I will mention here in a second, and then be able to support not only a building fund for sending students on the silent retreats at CCU, but also some of the other activities that we're considering as part of a rollout this summer of a new web presence, and some of the other silent retreats and activities that we're looking and dreaming about and trying to envision and see what God has for us, for me, in my ministry, not only at CCU, but across a broader spectrum of people. So that's the wrinkle. I will have more details for you as they come forward, and make that available if you are willing to be a partner with us in the ministry to young adults, ultimately to young adults, to introduce to them a new way of living, a revolutionary but ancient way of living. And the centerpiece of that, of course, is all the work that we do in the silent retreats. So, on the other note, if you have any questions to anything that comes up in the podcast, please direct message your questions to me at the Psych Monologues on Instagram. You can subscribe on the website at drmitch.com. And of course, when you subscribe, then you will get any of the new material that comes out with podcasts and other things that will be rolled out over the summer. So subscriptions can be done on the website. On Instagram, we can be found at the Psych Monologues, all lowercase, or at Facebook at ray.mitch, or LinkedIn at drmitch. At any one of those subscription or social media sites, we have a presence, and you will see the podcast rollout at each of those places. Also, wherever you subscribe or wherever you use and find your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, or iHeartRadio, we have a presence there as well, and so you can follow us there. Please leave a comment if there are any things that strike your heart and get you thinking, or that you think is worthy of mention. Please do so on there. That just raises our profile and makes some of the material available to more people. And the last thing, which connects up with the Apple subscription service I was mentioning to you before, is partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund for the CCU Silent Retreats. You can do that and make your tax-deductible gifts available to us. If you'd like to contribute through a check, you can do that by sending a check to 1615.tv. Make it out to that. P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado, 80104. You can also subscribe on the website. Go to CCU Silent Retreats in the drop-down menu, and you will find a donation button at the bottom. And that too will be part of your tax-deductible gift to support our silent retreats. And I will say more just to remind people, if they're listening for the first time, we are in an exciting time, certainly now with the pandemic somewhat in the rearview mirror. We are now preparing for our next year of retreats, and it's really a great time to consider partnering with us to continue to grow our scholarship fund and for the students who want to attend our retreat. So that is it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Dr. Ray Mitch. Love ya. Later. Bye.